Hi, I'm Hannah. This is a story I never thought I would tell, but here it is. It all started on the first day of school. I was a new teacher at Greenfield High School. I had just finished university, and now I was standing in front of my very first class, ready to teach English. The students were nervous, and I was nervous too. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. When I walked into the classroom, I looked around at the students. They all looked so young, so full of energy. But one student caught my eye. His name was Alex. He was sitting near the front, his eyes bright, his posture straight. He wasn't nervous like the others. Instead, he looked confident. And that made me nervous. I started my lesson, speaking slowly, trying to explain the first topic. But every time I looked at Alex, he was staring at me. Not just looking, but staring. His eyes were full of curiosity. He was different from the other students. The other students were busy writing notes or looking at their phones, but not Alex. He was always paying attention. Every time I asked a question, his hand was the first to go up. At first, I thought maybe he was just a good student. But there was something about the way he smiled when I answered his question. It wasn't a normal smile, it was a smile that made my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, feeling embarrassed. Focus, Hannah, I told myself. He's just a student. After class, I stayed in the room for a while, organizing my papers. When I turned around, Alex was standing there. He was holding his books in one hand, his other hand in his pocket. He smiled at me again. This time, it was a soft smile, not like the others. Miss Hannah, he said, his voice calm and clear. Can I ask you something? I nodded, trying to hide the strange feeling in my chest. Of course, Alex. What's on your mind? He paused for a second, and I saw him glance around the empty classroom. It was just the two of us now. You're new here, right? He asked, his voice low. How are you finding it so far? His question was simple, but the way he asked it made me feel different. I smiled and tried to keep the conversation normal. It's a little scary, but I'm excited. I love teaching, and I'm happy to be here. Alex nodded slowly. I'm sure you'll be a great teacher, he said with a small, almost secret smile. Then, he turned to leave, but before he walked out the door, he looked back at me one more time. See you tomorrow, Miss Hannah. And just like that, he was gone. But I stood there for a moment, staring at the door. Something about Alex felt different. I couldn't explain it, but my heart was beating faster than it should have been. It was just a smile, right? Just a normal conversation, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something that would change everything. After that first day, I couldn't stop thinking about Alex. Every time I walked into the classroom, I felt his eyes on me, and I couldn't help but look back at him. There was something in his gaze that made me nervous, but also something that made me feel alive. He was always so confident, never shy, always answering my questions. He made everyone else in the class seem quiet, and yet he wasn't rude. No, he had a way of being polite, yet still so present. At first, I told myself it was just a feeling, a normal part of being a new teacher. I was still adjusting to this new life, right? But it was more than that. Every time I looked at Alex, I felt something stirring inside of me. He was charming in a way that made it hard to concentrate on anything else. The other students were just students. But Alex? He was different. During the next few weeks, things started to change. He would stay after class to ask me questions, not just about the lessons, but about life. About what I liked to do outside of school. At first, I thought it was just him being friendly, trying to get to know me as a teacher. But then the conversations became more personal. He would ask about my favorite books, my favorite music, even what I liked to do on weekends. One afternoon, after class, Alex stayed again. This time, he was leaning against my desk, looking at me with those same intense eyes. "Miss Hannah," he said softly, his voice calm, but with a hint of something else in it. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Alex," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, then smiled slightly. "What made you become a teacher?" I thought about his question for a moment. Well, I've always loved English. And I wanted to help people learn and grow. Teaching it's more than just a job for me. It's about connecting with others. He nodded slowly, his eyes not leaving mine. There was a quiet moment, and I could almost hear my heart beating in my ears. "I think you're a good teacher," he said, his words making me blush. "I think you're really good at this." I smiled, trying to brush off the feeling in my chest. "Thank you, Alex. That means a lot." For a second, he didn't move. He was just staring at me, and I could feel the air between us grow thicker, heavier. I tried to look away, but I couldn't. I didn't know why, but every time he looked at me like that, I felt like something was changing. Like something was growing between us. "See you tomorrow, Miss Hannah," Alex said with a small smile. He turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back over his shoulder. I'm glad you're here, he added, his voice quieter this time. I watched him leave, my heart racing. I tried to shake it off. He's just a student, I reminded myself. You're his teacher. Nothing can happen. But the truth was, something already had happened. The connection between us was undeniable. And I was starting to wonder if I could keep pretending it didn't exist. It was another afternoon after class. The room was quiet now, just the sound of papers shuffling as I packed my bag. I had almost finished when I looked up and saw Alex standing by the door. He wasn't smiling this time. His usual confident look was replaced by something different. Something serious. I stopped moving, my heart beginning to race again. Miss Hannah? His voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. Can we talk? Of course, Alex, I replied, trying to sound calm, even though I could feel my hands shaking. What's on your mind? He closed the door behind him, and I noticed that his usual confidence had faded a little. He walked slowly toward me, his eyes never leaving mine. There was a nervous energy in the air, something I hadn't felt before. This wasn't like the usual conversations we had about books or music. No, this felt different. He stopped in front of my desk and took a deep breath. I have to say something, he said, looking down at his feet for a moment before meeting my eyes again. I've been thinking about this for a while, and it's hard for me to say, but I think you should know. I felt a knot form in my stomach. His words, the way he was looking at me, there was something heavy in the air. Something was about to change, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. What is it, Alex? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He took another deep breath. Miss Hannah, he began, his voice shaking just a little. I like you. I've liked you for a while now, and I know this is crazy. You're my teacher. But I can't stop thinking about you. The words hit me like a wave. My breath caught in my throat. He likes me? My mind raced, but I couldn't find the words to respond. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Instead, I just stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I know it's not right, Alex continued quickly, almost as if he was trying to convince himself. But every time I see you, every time we talk, I can't help how I feel. I'm sorry if this makes things uncomfortable. For a moment, all I could do was stand there in shock. I hadn't expected this. This is wrong, I told myself. He's my student. I can't let this happen. But as much as I tried to push the thought away, a small part of me couldn't help but feel something. I had never felt so confused in my life. Finally, I found my voice. Alex, you can't, we can't have feelings for each other. You're my student. This is wrong. He nodded, his face falling. I know, he said quietly. I just had to tell you. I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I felt terrible. He looked so vulnerable, so sincere, and I hated the fact that I was the one to crush his feelings. But I also knew I couldn't let this go any further. Alex, I said gently, my voice softening. I'm flattered, truly. But I can't let myself feel the same way. I have to keep this professional. He looked away for a moment, and I saw his hands tighten into fists. He took a step back and looked at me with a sad smile. I understand, he said, his voice now much quieter. I just wanted to be honest with you. I appreciate your honesty, I replied, my heart aching for him. But we can't let this get in the way of your education, or my job. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. It felt like time had stopped. Finally, Alex broke the silence. I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Hannah, he said, his voice still low but steady. Good night, Alex, I whispered as he turned to leave. As soon as the door closed behind him, I let out a deep breath. My heart was still racing, and my mind was spinning. What had just happened? Why did it feel like everything had changed in a single conversation? I sat down at my desk, my hands trembling. What do I do now? I thought. How can I go back to just being his teacher after this? The question lingered in my mind, unanswered. But deep down, I knew that something between us had shifted. It would never be the same again. The days after Alex's confession were the hardest. Every time I walked into the classroom, I felt a strange tension in the air. The way Alex looked at me, the way he sometimes smiled, and the way he avoided eye contact at other times, it was all confusing. I tried to pretend everything was normal, but deep down, I knew nothing was the same. I had to keep reminding myself that I was his teacher, and nothing could happen between us. But every time I saw him, those words he had said echoed in my mind. I like you, Miss Hannah. I can't stop thinking about you. It wasn't just about the feelings he had for me, it was about what I felt for him. I couldn't deny it anymore. There was a part of me that wanted to believe in the possibility of something more, but the responsible, professional side of me knew that wasn't possible. One day, after class, I stayed behind to prepare for the next lesson. I thought I was alone when I heard the door creak open behind me. I turned around, expecting to see one of the other students, but instead, it was Alex. He looked uncertain, like he was about to say something, but then stopped. "Miss Hannah," he began quietly, his voice almost hesitant. I've been thinking about what happened. And I just want to say I'm sorry if I made things awkward between us." I felt a wave of relief. At least he understood that things couldn't continue like this. I took a deep breath and smiled, trying to keep the situation light. "Alex, it's okay. I understand. We need to focus on your studies. You're here to learn, not to worry about anything else." He nodded, but there was something in his eyes, something that said he wasn't ready to let go. "I know," he said softly, his gaze never leaving mine. "But it's hard. I can't help the way I feel. I just wanted you to know." I took a step forward, trying to create some distance. "I understand, Alex. But we can't let this affect your education. I need to focus on being your teacher." There was a long pause. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the battle between his feelings and the reality of the situation. Finally, he broke the silence. "I'll try, Miss Hannah," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to make things hard for you. But it's not easy." "I know," I replied quietly, my heart aching for him. "But it's the right thing to do." He looked down for a moment, then met my eyes again, his expression softening. "I'll respect that," he said. "I'll try my best to keep it professional." I smiled weakly, not sure if I was convincing either of us. "Thank you, Alex." He nodded and turned to leave. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at me. "I won't forget what I said," he said quietly, before walking out. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, I collapsed into the chair at my desk. I put my hands over my face, feeling a deep exhaustion wash over me. I had been trying so hard to push aside my own feelings, to maintain control, but the truth was, I didn't know how long I could keep this up. The line between professional and personal was getting thinner by the day, and I wasn't sure I could continue to ignore the growing connection between us. The days that followed were quiet, and Alex started keeping his distance. He focused more on his studies, no longer staying after class to talk, no longer looking at me with that same intensity. It was as if he was trying to bury his feelings just as I had been doing. But there was a certain sadness in his eyes now, a sadness I couldn't ignore. It was clear that neither of us was happy with the situation. But what could we do? We had to move on, for both our sakes. The reality of the situation was inescapable. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slowly slipping away from both of us. Alex was no longer the student who stayed after class to ask about life. He was just another student. And I was just his teacher. A teacher who wanted to forget the way his confession had made me feel. A teacher who wanted to move forward and pretend nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew the truth. Things had changed. They would never be the same again. The final week of the semester was approaching, and the air between Alex and me had become tense in a way I couldn't explain. It was as if everything we had once shared, the small conversations, the laughs, the friendly gestures, had faded away. What remained was an unspoken understanding that we couldn't cross any lines. Every day, I reminded myself that this was for the best. But deep down, a part of me couldn't help but feel like I was losing something important. Something I couldn't quite name. The last day of classes arrived. I was busy finalizing grades and preparing everything for the break, but as I walked into the classroom, I felt a heaviness in my chest. This was it. The end of the semester. And possibly the end of whatever had been between Alex and me. As the students filed into the room, I noticed Alex sitting in his usual spot. He didn't look at me right away, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like a stranger in my own classroom. His eyes were down, focused on his notebook. He had stopped looking at me the way he used to, stopped making small talk after class. It was as if the walls between us had grown higher and thicker with each passing day. I tried to keep my focus on the lesson. I talked about the last few topics we needed to cover, but my mind wasn't really there. I kept sneaking glances at Alex, who seemed more distant than ever. Finally, the bell rang, signaling the end of the class. The students gathered their things and started heading out. But as Alex walked past me, he stopped and turned to face me. His expression was serious, but there was something else there, something familiar, like the old Alex, the one who would talk to me without hesitation. "Miss Hannah," he said quietly, his voice soft but clear. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded, trying to keep my composure. "Of course, Alex. What's on your mind?" He stepped closer, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the familiar rush of emotion stir inside me. There was something in his eyes, a quiet longing that I hadn't seen in so long. It made my heart ache, and I quickly turned my gaze away, focusing on my desk. "I know things have been strange between us," he began, his voice hesitant. "And I understand why. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For being kind to me when no one else was. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." I looked up at him, surprised. I didn't know what to say. He was thanking me? After everything that had happened? I don't want you to think that I've forgotten what you said, he continued, his voice steady now. I know I made things difficult. But I'm okay now. I understand why we can't be more than what we are. I just wanted you to know that. I'll always remember the good times. I felt a lump form in my throat. Alex, you don't need to thank me. I'm glad I could help. And I'm proud of how far you've come. He smiled softly, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. There was no classroom, no walls between us. Just him, standing there, looking at me with sincerity in his eyes. It was a bittersweet feeling. I'll miss you, Miss Hannah, he said quietly, and I could see the sadness in his eyes. But I think this is the right thing to do. We both need to move on. I nodded, swallowing hard. I didn't trust myself to speak, because I knew that if I did, I would say something I wasn't ready to say. You're right, Alex. We both need to move on. For a moment, there was silence. Then Alex stepped back, his hand lingering by the door handle.
Goodbye,
Miss Hannah, he said softly. Thank you for everything. I managed to smile, though it was more of a sad curve of my lips than anything else.
goodbye.
Alex. Take care. And with that, he walked out of the classroom, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood there for a few moments, staring at the empty room. The weight of the moment settled over me. Alex was gone. And while I knew it was for the best, a part of me still felt like something was missing. Something that would never come back. I slowly gathered my things, still in a daze. The last few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, and now it was over. As I left the classroom and walked down the empty hallway, I couldn't help but wonder, did I make the right choice? Was it really over? Or had we simply reached an end that wasn't meant to be? As I stepped outside into the cold air, I felt a strange sense of finality. But there was also a feeling of hope. Maybe, in time, the sadness would fade. Maybe, one day, I would understand why things had turned out the way they had. But for now, all I could do was move forward.